Okay, welcome back. I'm Oliver Lundy and I'm a photographer from the UK. This is part of my complete photography course. This episode, we're going to be looking at shutter speed. If you're already familiar with how to shoot in manual, then skip forward a few in the playlist and look at how we apply these concepts or any of the other concepts that we go into. However, if you're still at the beginning stage and you're still learning the exposure triangle, this is where you need to be when we dive into shutter speed. So what is shutter speed? Very simply, inside every camera there is a sensor or film, and when you open up the shutter, you are exposing that sensor to light, and you have to determine how much time you're opening up that shutter. It can be anything from a few seconds all the way up to sort of 30 seconds, or it can be a fraction of a second, and it's really, really fast, depending on how much light is in your scene and how bright you want the image to be. That's shutter speed, that's all it is. If you actually want to see it happening, you can sort of open up a camera and click the shutter, but it's just as easy to go online and check a video to see what it is if you really want to see it actually happening and how it functions. But for now, all you need to know is shutter speed is how long you are opening up the shutter, and therefore how bright the image is. The longer it's open for, the brighter the image gets, and the shorter time it's open for, the darker the image gets. And if you change nothing else, that's what would happen. And we're going to get into how you balance these against the other elements of the exposure triangle, being aperture and ISO, in the video at the end of this series, looking at how to put this into practice. So the only other thing you need to know about shutter speed is, just like aperture has a secondary element, which is depth of field, and if you're not familiar with depth of field, go back one and watch the aperture video. Shutter speed's secondary function is what's known as motion blur. So in photography, and you've almost definitely seen these shots, whether it's a sports photo or a wildlife photo of a bird or some other fast moving subject, and the photographer has captured it in such a way that it's completely still. So that fast moving thing, like a bird coming in to grab an eagle flying in and grabbing a fish out of a river, or a hummingbird, or even just a sports photo of any type. Players running across a football field really fast, or kicking a ball on the boards, flying off, but it's actually completely sharp in the image. That has been taken at a very, very fast shutter speed. So fast, in fact, that it's frozen the action. If you were to shoot those same photos at a slower shutter speed, you would see blur. And that blur would be what, as the thing moves across the frame, it blurs. And this happens in your own vision. If you move something really fast, you don't see it in crisp detail, it blurs, and your brain can't process it fast enough. And it's the same with the camera. So when you use really, really fast shutter speeds, you can freeze action even if it's fast moving. And if you use a really, really low shutter speed, you can actually see the motion in things. And sometimes that's desirable. So if you were shooting a waterfall, for example, you might actually want to see some of the movement in that water, and it gives it a kind of soft, ethereal look. Or if you're shooting something like dancers and you actually want to show some of the movement that they're doing, then you might want to shoot at a shutter speed to show that motion. But what you need to know is that fast shutter speeds freeze action, and slow shutter speeds give you motion blur. So how does this actually apply when you're taking a photo? So if you're out there taking a photo of a friend, so you're taking a portraiture, generally speaking, people are quite good at staying still, but they're not good at staying perfectly still. Even if you're breathing slightly, or you're standing still and you're moving slightly, or you're smiling and you're actually trying to capture genuine emotion on people's faces, it's very difficult to hold a kind of perfect smile for a photo. So you want to be able to capture it in a way that they don't have to stay still. You can just snap the photo and it will be sharp and in focus. And so to do that, you have to shoot a fast enough shutter speed, and for people that's going to be somewhere around sort of 1/25 of a second to 200ths of a second. It will give you a sharp image of a person, assuming that you're both not running along, and that's how fast you need to shoot to keep to freeze people who are kind of just standing still or sitting down or whatever, not moving. And if you were to go much lower than that, so sort of 50th of a second, a 30th of a second, then you might start seeing soft, blurry images because their head's moving slightly, or they're breathing, or they're moving backwards and forwards. And the other thing that might introduce blur into your images is your hands physically moving when you take the shot. The act of pressing the button can actually move the camera slightly. As you get more practiced, you'll be able to hold the camera more still, and there's a whole section on how to get the best handheld shots in another video. But the thing that you need to know is that camera shake or camera movement can cause blurry images if you're not using a fast enough shutter speed. And there's a rule for this, and it's called the Reciprocal Rule. And essentially it is, whatever your focal length is, you shouldn't shoot below that. So if you're shooting on a 50mm lens, you need to be shooting at least 1/50th of a second or faster. And generally it's better to give yourself a bit of wiggle room. So if you double it, then you should be fine. And that gets even more important as you go up into the longer focal lengths. Just because if you've got a big telephoto lens on your camera, a tiny little movement here can cause a huge movement at this end, and therefore you need to go even faster. So if you're shooting on a sort of 400mm telephoto lens, you're going to need to be shooting at least 1/800th of a second or more. So camera shake is the kind of lower limit, and the upper limit is to do with how much light you have. Because if you just go, right, well, I'm shooting some sport, let's say, and I want to freeze the action, so I'm going to shoot at 1/1000th of a second because they're playing football in front of me and they're running really fast, so I need to shoot at 1/1000th of a second. Okay, great. But that could darken your image quite a lot. And you might not be able to get the image any brighter using the other settings. So sometimes you just have to accept you might not be able to get the best possible quality because you can't actually shoot any faster. But we'll get into that more in how you put this into practice. But for now, let's recap. So shutter speed is the amount of time that the shutter is open to the sensor. The longer the amount of time, or the slower the shutter speed, the brighter the image gets. And the shorter the amount of time, or the faster the shutter speed, the darker the image gets. The other thing that it controls is motion blur. So what do you do if you need to shoot at a lower shutter speed and you can't hold it still? You can put the camera down on a solid surface and take the photo that way, or you can use a tripod, which is the kind of preferred method, because then you can put it wherever you want and angle it in whatever way you want. Or you can just not use a slower shutter speed and try and get a photo in a different way. So we'll cover all the different ways that you can combat this problem and how you actually go about choosing what settings you use in a later video. We've covered aperture, we've covered shutter speed, now we're going to tackle ISO. Hope you can join us for that one, and please do let me know if you've got any questions in the comments below, and please do like and subscribe. It really does help us out, and it's free. What the hell? I'll see you in the next one.